we have some confirmation thanks to another, I'm pretty sure it was another book in the series or something, right?
Yeah,
That
so
was talking about how Yoda knows R2-D2. We were always wondering, why didn't Yoda seem to recognize R2 when Luke and R2 landed on Dagobah? But it looks like that Star Wars has confirmed, albeit a little softly,
right.
that this is true. And I know it came up in a book, but I'm trying to remember which one it is.
Yeah, so the book is how funny. It's called uh, From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back. It's written by Jim Zub, and it's called The First Lesson. And it showcases a perspective as Luke and R2 arrive on Dagobah, and they pretty much get into the fact that they do knowing each other. It says,
Oh, yeah, I remember the excerpt of the book where it talks about, he's talking about, oh, yeah, it figures that Luke would have Anakin's old droid. And
yeah, of course, the boy had Anakin's old droid with him. Such cycles of fate no longer surprise a 900-year-old Jedi.
yeah.
So he's like, okay, so that's basically he recognized, R2.
Yeah, which I actually think I think this is a cool thing. I honestly think that it's about time that they start to, albeit softly again,
Mm-hmm.
fix some of the plot holes that Star Wars has. Because there's a lot of questions we have. Of course, this ties into, in fact, we did a show a couple of weeks ago where we did, I think it was the top 5 unexplained or unanswered questions of Star Wars or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we didn't do this one, but we did do, why didn't Obi-Wan recognize R2?
Right.
But this could very easily have been in the list too, and I think that we even mentioned it as kind of like an honorable mention. It wasn't like an official one where we had a graphic and all this stuff for it, but I do remember us talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, one of the problems that Lucas had is that he had a rough outline, but unfortunately, as you guys all know, he was making up some of this stuff as he went along. I mean, this is one of the reasons why we had the Luke and Leia kiss. We had, some other inconsistencies, like, oh, Darth Vader killed your father, and then it was sort of like they had to clean it up. Well, that was true from a certain point of view. It's like, yeah, okay, man, it's called, you didn't know you wanted to make them related, and now all of a sudden you did, so now you have to figure out how to explain this in Return of the Jedi, which makes sense. But again, these are the kinds of things that I think sometimes unfairly, but sometimes, like in a case like this, it's fair. This is a fair question. There's some plot holes that everybody just likes to look at where you just have to say, look, man, it's a movie. I mean, it's going to, like, one plot hole that I thought was really cool, that the way Lucas explained it was, why does the prequel trilogy look so new and and high tech and all this? And, of course, the answer is because it was shot in 99, 2001, or 2002 and 2005. That's the real answer.
Right.
Is that ILM has a lot better effects now. But Lucas knew that he had to come up with some sort of an in-universe answer of why. And then that goes into what you started to say was, well, it was pre-war, everything was kind of new and regal and, majestic and all this. And then when you have the Empire taking over, it becomes utilitarian. It's no different than when I went over to Romania. It was explained to me that you could tell the original Romanian architecture versus the more utilitarian once the Soviets took over and it became predominantly communist. One of the things that happened was you saw a lot of the architecture being very functional, just like I said, utilitarian. It didn't have any real aesthetic or anything like that. It was just
there to do what it
very
needed to
industrial, and it exactly. And that was basically what had happened when the Empire took over, was that a lot of the beauty and the architecture and stuff was replaced by things that were more functional versus aesthetic. So there's things like that, but then there's other things like this, where you're having characters that spent quite a bit of time with each other that are acting like they don't even know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always a problem for a lot of people. And it's nice that the folks over at Star Wars are like, you know what, let's start to try to fix some of this, because they're able to, now that they have enough of a picture, because they've made the sequel trilogy, they've gone a little bit. Now they're starting to even go back before the prequels officially in canon. So they have enough where they could actually start to
shape
things a little bit. Exactly. Because part of the reason why I think that they didn't is they didn't want to paint themselves into a corner any further.
Right.
But there's other elements of it to where it's like, guys, I mean, come on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm glad. Like I said, I'm glad that they've, fixed those problems, because, of course, that's one of those big glaring things.
This was a big one. I mean, honestly, this was a really big one. There's this. There was, of course, the ObiWan R2. What are some of the other ones that we can think of that
Lando wearing Han's clothes?
Yeah. Well, that was a big one too. And then I think we ended up explaining that with he just had those outfits in his closet, and they're kind of roughly the same size. So
they had to hurry and get out of it. It's not
they had to hurry up. Exactly. Well, that was one of the things you brought up that I didn't really think about, was the fact that, look, man, they didn't exactly have time to go to their local Kohl's or whatever
and pack a bag or anything.
Yeah, exactly. And let me go back and to Bespin that I just fled.
Right.
And let me go pick up a couple of things. Or here, let me just type into my wrist and get Lobot to meet us with a couple of capes or something on the way out.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm glad. Like I said, I'm glad that, we get a chance to. I mean, I really did love that scene, though, Empire, because I thought it was just hilarious about how, R2's trying to he's kind of trying to quietly bring that little arm out to snatch that little light back from Yoda, and Yoda takes a stick and he's all like beating him with it. It was just very playful.
And what's funny about that is that when you read this recognition, it puts that in a new light.
Mm-hmm.
Because now it's almost like a familiarity.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is that even though you have confirmation, and I mean, I know this is kind of splitting hairs here, but you had the confirmation that Yoda knew R2. And you've got to imagine that R2 recognizes Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, we recognize now, thanks to The Mandalorian, thanks to a lot of other canonical things, that this species is not exactly the most common in the world.
Right.
I mean, you basically had Yoda and Yaddle, and we hadn't seen any evidence that there were any of these other... Because, usually, like, if they visit spaceports or something like that, you'll see, oh, look, there's the... what are they called? Like Icthorin or whatever Hammerhead was.
Oh, yeah.
Like Ithorian or Thorin or something like that. But yeah, or like the Rhodians or the Tredorians or...
Quarren, you got...
Yeah, your Quarrens.
Mon Calamari.
Right. You would see other beings of this species running around somewhere.
Yeah, you have like your Admiral Akbar, but then there's like other Mon Calamari.
Right, exactly. Kaminoans, Geonosins. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Throughout all of canon, you see all this stuff mentioned. You never see... We don't even know what Yoda's species is.
Yeah, I mean, you had a whole planet of Wookiees. I mean, we've never seen another Wookiee until we got to Kashyyyk. So it was like, oh, okay.
Well, there was Lumpy and we saw him. You just we saw him. You just don't want to acknowledge him. See, that's the difference. But I mean, though, that's the kind of thing though that makes Star Wars, I think, connected and fun. Is that, and I think more realistic. And I think the Mandalorian's actually doing a lot to further that. Is that, look, you're going to see these familiar beings in other areas.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing that I really love, too, is that they did this a little bit in The Mandalorian, but they've been sneakily doing this in other stuff, too. And I have a feeling that this is going to be compounded as time goes on. Is that usually, if you have a hero that is of a particular species, what's been the tendency is that everybody of that species would be somewhat noble. But what I like is, you say you have a Mon Calamari. You might have a Mon Calamari that's maybe not so noble and might actually be evil and a criminal. Just because Admiral Akbar was amazing doesn't mean that everybody in his species is like Admiral Akbar, in other words.
Right, exactly. Just how we saw the Quarren, in the Clone Wars, they were kind of very aggressive and very kind of nasty.
Yeah.
But even the Mandalorian, they're the same way.
Sure. And I mean, that, even on Earth, right? I mean, we got people that are really good, but we got pirates too. We got, criminals. Not everybody who's human is, cool just because one or two people, might be. So, I mean, you have to take it into those kind of perspectives. Ronaldo says, luckily, they finally explained it. Now tell us if Han shot first.
Yes.
Well, here's what's funny about that, too. That keeps going down this insane rabbit hole that just amazes me, because now Lucas is trying to sell the idea that he always meant for Greedo to have shot first. And in fact, I guess if the idea was they were supposedly shooting at the same time or something weird, but Greedo shot missed and Hans hit, and he wanted to use the special edition to make that a little bit more obvious. First of all, I don't know if I believe that. No. I think that's a little bit of revisionist history.
That's a bunch of crap.
It is, but I also think that if that is true, that's too bad, because I think the scene works best when Han shot first.
It does. It always works best because it's to his character. He's a smuggler. He's and he's very, once again, very cunning, very kind of sly. And that's Han. It makes sense. And he knows, and you got to think about it. He knows why Greedo is there. It's not like, they just happen to they did kind of happen to bump into each other, but it's kind of like, oh yeah, like I know, because that's the whole reason. Like Han is like, okay, this whole trip can really save our necks. So it's just like the fact that Greedo shows up and he's just like, look, I'm about to pay you. Just give me a second. I just made this trip. I got to drop this kid and this old man and these couple of droids off.
Well, that kind of brings up
I'm
another...
good. And we're good here. And then, well, why don't you just give it to me? Like, well, I just take your ship. Now, of course, once again, especially once we see Solo, we see how much Han, of course, loves the Falcon. And, so it's like, okay, my ship over my dead body. So, and like I said, Greedo is a bounty hunter. We know that's what he's like. It's no different if the man if Din Djarin showed up. Like, okay, I know, or Boba. Like, I know why you're here. So my thing is, okay, I gotta get the drop on you before you get the drop on me. So,
well, I think this is part of the reason why bounty hunters got sort of that evil, because Greedo obviously was a bad guy because he was against Han, who was the good guy. Mm-hmm. Loosely speaking, of course.
Right.
But I mean, these are the kinds of things that I really like, is the fact that you have this attention to character. This is what would be in this nature. There's thought into it. It's not just,
right,
man in white hat shoots man in black hat kind of a thing.
Right. It's almost kind of the same thing like we talked about with Palpatine. Is that like, okay, the fact that he's that cunning, he's thinking that in depth about how am I going to do this? And into that character is what I'm saying. So with Greedo and Han, yeah, it's like, okay, they're both kind of criminals in their own respect, I guess. So, or I won't say criminals, I'll say they're both kind of shady in their own respect. So it just makes sense that, okay, if I know you're shady and I'm shady, well, I got to figure out who's going to be the real Slim Shady. No, just, but,
exactly. I was thinking it. I was singing it in my head, I have to admit.
But no, I have to figure out like, okay, well, I have to get you before you get to me. I mean, that's just like, it's almost like street rules. It's like, okay, I'm going to get you before you get me. So it makes more sense. And the fact that you see Han kind of just, diverting his attention, like, look, I don't have it with me. And then he's like, his hand is like under the table. He's taking the blaster out.
Yeah, what's really weird about that is that if you look, he does his other hand and he kind of like puts it over here while he's, I don't have it with me. It's kind of like diverting here. Look over here while I have a blaster over here.
Exactly.
But the thing that's interesting to me, this has always been kind of cool, is that, Han's probably been a little bit less than honest with some of these people, right?
Of course.
Well, the thing that's really funny is that he was actually telling the truth. It's like, look, man, because what was hilarious is I always thought this with Empire Strikes Back, too, is that it's kind of the rebels' fault that he ended up the way that he ended up with Jabba and all that other stuff. Because if you remember in Empire Strikes Back, he was like, listen, yes, I'm going to come back. I'm going to join, but I got to get this price off my head. I got to go see Jabba. I got to give him this money.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just got to take off. And, of course, well, you're a good man. We'd hate to lose you. And it's like he was really legitimately trying to pay the money.
Mm-hmm.
But each time he got sidetracked.
Right. Well, that's why I love the fact that even in The Force Awakens, when he starts in a conjure club and he's talking to all those other guys, and he's like, look, don't I always make it? Yes, I do. All the time. It's just like, oh, yeah. He's like, well, you told him. No, I didn't. Then all the guys show up. He's like, hey, I was about to, like, you could see him getting caught up. Like, crap.
I mean, there was actually a lot of elements about that. First of all, I really love the fact that he was probably the funniest in that movie.
Oh, my goodness.
Like, that was probably the most comedic Han Solo. As funny as he is in all the movies,
yeah,
that's probably most comedy from that character that we've had.
Especially, like, sometimes it's not intentional. Like, that's not how the Force works.
That's, like, one of my favorite lines, especially because, Han was never really all that
keen on, like, the whole idea of the
First of all, he didn't really believe it or any of that stuff anyway. And then he wasn't really around for a lot of the stuff. We're sitting there going, well, this whole saga is about the Force. But if you really look at all the scenes he was in, he had very little contact with it.
Yeah, even in
Solo. Or experience. Right.
So that's one thing I love, too. Is like, they didn't put that around him. So he still had that image in his head of, like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, even though what's ironic is, unbeknownst to him, he's dealing with a bunch of Force users all the time. He had no idea that Crimson Dawn was headed by Darth Maul.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what else happened in between that, like when he was working with Jabba and stuff like that.
One of my favorite Han lines still from The Force Awakens when he was talking to BB-8, he's like, move, ball.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was just one thing after another. And then, of course, the other thing that was hilarious, too, is here's this guy, obviously, like, way older than he was, but he's still kind of, it's almost like that guy who never grew up, who's doing the same thing, when they're like 70, that when they were 18.
The Al Bundy thing?
Yeah, but it looks a little bit more sad. And that's really the thing that was striking to me about The Force Awakens is he's back to being a smuggler, but that doesn't really fit him anymore.
Yeah, because like you say, he's been this whole war general.
He's been the war general, the hero, and that's kind of how we're used to seeing him. And to see him again the way that he kind of was for episode 4 when we meet him, it's weird somehow.
That's true.
And I thought that was actually a brilliant way of capturing it, that Leia goes back to what she knows, Han goes back to what he knows. That was something that you really didn't expect, and I thought that was every bit as realistic as what happened with Luke in The Last Jedi, even though you can make the argument they could have handled it differently, or maybe they could have made him a little bit more disillusioned. Like, one of the ways I think that they could have solved the problem is to had him be more heroic and everything in 8, maybe had him become more disillusioned in 9, because once he was heroic and did what he was supposed to do and everybody's counting on him, it's almost like it's conjuring up memories, and they could have done some stuff. And granted, it would have been a little bit tight because you only had a couple of movies to do this in. But at the same time, character development's a funny thing. Like, I was talking to Sam today, and, I was asking him if he saw Cobra Kai Season 3, which he did, and he liked it. He didn't like it as much as the first 2, though, because he thought that a lot of things were rushed in Season 3. And even though for me, I was totally fine with it, and I thought that the character development was amazing in it, for him, there were certain things like Hawk's transformation and things like that even though they were foreshadowed, and he admitted, he was like, yeah, I get that they were foreshadowed, but it should have been more obvious and it should have been a little bit longer. Or maybe what you could have done was make the episodes a little longer. But the point that I'm making is that it's really difficult to satisfy everybody with character development because some people need more character development and some people don't need as much in order for the same outcome to happen.
Right.
So you can have a disillusioned Luke Some people would need a little bit more lead time for that. Other people would be okay with a couple of scenes. See, but the problem is you can't, as a creator, as a filmmaker, you have to do what it is that you feel you need to do for basically the sake of the movie you're making. And that's, I think, where things get a little crazy. But when you're talking about something like what we've been talking about, where you're dealing with actual plot holes, I think that that's where it's a little bit different. That the fans do need a definitive explanation. You can't have two characters that know each other, like R2 and Yoda, and they suddenly don't know who they are anymore.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of people that have been trying to explain that. Well, there's a lot of astromech droids. Well, there's,
Mm-hmm.
But still, it's like, come on, man. I could deal with that maybe if it's a scene here and there. Just like I know another thing that, we talked about too was the fact that it was a little convenient that Anakin built 3PO.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was closing the universe a little bit. I don't know. It's like, it's cool, but I don't know if I really
needed that.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I think that it could have been done without. Now, Ronaldo comes in with, look, your worshipfulness, let's get one thing straight. I take orders from just one person, me. Han Solo. And then I always wanted to tell that to my boss at work. Well, good luck with that.
Yes.
Let me know how that goes.
Hope you have another one lined up.
Yeah, exactly. You might want to. There would probably be. I'm trying to think of a Star Wars line where they're begging and pleading, but basically, I think your boss would do the whole. We hope that you will lose your job honorably. But these are the kinds of things I think that, you just have to take into consideration when you're dealing with characters like this, where you just have issues where you have these glaring plot holes that need to be fixed. There's some that I think that they can let go, like the Anakin 3PO thing. It's a little convenient. It's a little like, okay, whatever. But I mean, you could sort of hang with that.
Mm-hmm.
You can hang with the fact that Anakin, you would think that Vader, though, would have recognized him. And they did make that canon, by the way, where there was a comic where, he actually, I don't know, I think he found him in the Bestman junk pile or something. I don't remember where it was, but they had a little bit of a scene. So we'll have to see. But let us know in the comments section below, or, if you're chatting or whatever, let us know what you guys are thinking. If you like this video so far, make sure that you hit that subscribe button, hit the notification button so you know when we release other videos. And, don't forget to like the video.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.